Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Earlier today, all of you in the press were treated to a great deal of theater when the head of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, sat down with congressional leaders in a series of meetings. It was theater not just because of the spectacle of cameras and protesters, but because when it comes to policy differences that need to be worked out between the nominee and Congressional Republicans, there really aren't that many. Speaker Ryan said this morning in his joint statement with Donald Trump there are, quote, few differences between the GOP and Trump, and he was encouraged by the meeting. The party was closer to unifying. I suppose that means they're papering over what differences there were to start with. Does that mean that Congressional Republicans are changing on trade or on cuts to Social Security and Medicare? The fact is, Senate Republicans have been governing from the Trump textbook for years. They may not be proud of how their nominee expresses himself or pleased with the tone of his campaign and the name-calling, but on policy, Donald Trump and Republicans are singing from the same hymnal. Nowhere is that more clear right now than the current blockade over the Supreme Court. Hours after Justice Scalia passed, Donald Trump gave Senate Republicans their marching orders. Delay, delay, delay. Donald Trump wants the power to fill that seat, and as many others as he can, with judges that will reflect his worldview rather than judge cases based on the law. Donald Trump has called for a Supreme Court delay, and almost every single Republican fell in line. But it's not just the Trump Supreme Court, where Trump and the Senate Republicans are on lockstep. It's on almost every issue facing us this fall. Giving more tax breaks to the wealthy, blowing a huge hole in our deficit, sounds great to Donald Trump and to Senate Republicans. Rolling back Wall Street reform, putting our economy at risk, Donald Trump and Senate Republicans both want to do that. Threatening a national default and ensuing economic disaster, Donald Trump has called for it. The Republican senators have actually done it. The idea that there's a massive gulf on policy between Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress is pure fiction. As the senior senator from Texas said, Donald Trump will need a Republican majority to govern. The policies of both candidate Trump and Republican Senate majority are way out of touch with the middle class and what we need to get America going. Senate Republicans have been reading and governing from the Trump textbook for years. The two will be tied at the hip in this election. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you very much. You know, what we're seeing right now is the Republicans coming forward in a step of unity and really becoming a shill for a reality TV star. We might want to call it Congressional Apprentice. The Trump textbook shows how Senate Republicans have supported some of the most extreme policies that Trump has suggested. In fact, over and over again, they actually have been on the same side, whether it's Trump's position on equal pay, minimum wage, or taxes that would be dangerous for our economy and for women. We've seen this from Republicans for years. In the latest round of how Trump disrespects women, the Republican nominee has said he will only nominate judges who would undermine or overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, think about this for a second. Donald Trump has said he doesn't want an objective umpire going in and listening to a case. He wants a nominee who's already picked a side, and that side is against women and their health care. Trump has vowed to repeal the ACA. We don't know what he'll replace it with, but it's going to be great. Take away Medicare benefits, kick millions of children and seniors and working class Americans off of Medicaid. And this is something we've seen reflected in the Ryan budget for years, that we've seen in the Republican budget resolutions. When we look at what's happening for women, it's no wonder that 70% of women don't like Donald Trump. I trust women. They're smart enough to see what's going on and what's in their interests. Donald Trump still believes his tax plan that benefits the wealthy at the expense of the middle class is the optimum plan. Well, it certainly isn't for the people in Michigan that I represent, and it shows where his priorities really lie. The fact is, his irresponsible tax plan would be a windfall for millionaires and billionaires like himself, and it would be working men and women who pay for it. So the bottom line is that Donald Trump is not only not prepared to be president, not only is he a loose cannon, but the Senate Republicans coming together to support him as they have done today is dangerous for the country. Senator Casey.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Stabenow. When I step back and consider what the Republican agenda has been in the Senate over the last couple of years, at least since 2009, you might even go back further, but at least since 2009, let me provide at least my summary of what I see coming out of that caucus. First and foremost, scorched earth opposition to President Obama. No matter what he has been for, it seems they're always against, even before they know any details. So total objection to anything the president has tried to do, whether that's rescuing the economy from the ditch that it was in after President Bush, or whether that's expanding opportunity for the middle class. Whatever it is, they're against. Number two, total hostility to comprehensive immigration reform. We saw that over and over again as a pillar of Republican orthodoxy in the Senate. Number three, repealing the Affordable Care Act, and thereby saying to children that if you have a pre-existing condition, tough luck. If you have other challenges because of a healthcare system that wasn't working for people, tough luck. Total opposition to covering 20 million Americans who are now covered by the ACA. And number four isn't a policy issue, it's really a lack of a policy issue. Number four, no new ideas, no alternatives to any of the challenges that face the middle class. So if those four, and I could go on, but I won't, if those four sound at all familiar, they should, because that's in some ways the agenda of the Republican caucus is the personification of the candidacy of Donald Trump. In a sense, you could say that when you consider his candidacy and its relationship to their caucus, you could almost say to that caucus, you built that. You built that candidacy. I'll raise a few more and then relinquish the microphone. How about ISIS? What do we hear on ISIS from both the almost Republican nominee and the Republican caucus? A lot of hot air, a lot of yelling and screaming, but no plan, no specific ideas about how to defeat ISIS. Minimum wage, a lot of hot air, but not serious about raising it. Talk about it, but no commitment to increase the minimum wage. Equal pay, that's easy for both of them. No, that's all you hear. And finally, an economic plan, just at a time when maybe the number one issue for the middle class, and we got a reminder today again, another report talking about how the middle class has been undermined and for so many destroyed. Even in the midst of all that data and all that anxiety about the future, what do we hear from the Republican Party in the Senate, and what do we hear from their candidate for president? It's a plan to drive us right back into that ditch that I mentioned at the outset, the ditch that we were in when President Obama took over. So that's the connection between the two. I think it's plainly evident that this candidacy is completely tied to the agenda of the Republican caucus. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Senator Casey and Senator Stabenow and Senator Schumer. Well, today was a big day, a huge day for the candidacy of Donald Trump. He had an opportunity to come here to the Capitol and to meet with Speaker Ryan and to meet with Leader McConnell, and they emerged from their meetings saying that there were few differences that remained between them. No matter what you think of Donald Trump as the now certain Republican nominee for the presidency, there's no ambiguity about his future role were he to be elected president and his views in terms of filling a vacancy on the Supreme Court. One of the most important roles the Senate of the United States has is the confirmation of nominees to the Supreme Court. One of the most important decisions a president will ever make is who they would nominate to the Supreme Court. So every single Republican senator who today is saying they refuse to consider Judge Merrick Garland is saying they would prefer to have Donald Trump choose who will be the next justice of the United States Supreme Court. What we know about Donald Trump's positions, we largely can draw from his business dealings and from his speeches. And if you reflect for a moment on the man who brought you Trump steaks, Trump vodka, Trump towers, Trump casinos, you may learn something. You may gain some insight into who Republican senators want to have nominate the next justice to the United States Supreme Court. Someone with no previous experience in the judicial nomination process, someone whose principal proposal as a candidate is facially violative of the United States Constitution and some of our most foundational principles, and someone who regularly disrespects women and minorities. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I'm confident that I don't want Trump justice on the Supreme Court. Thank you.
Questions?
Senator, your party is not exactly unified yet either. Bernie Sanders is still in the race. He's still winning states. He says don't moan to him about whether he's hurting Hillary Clinton. Do you think he's hurting your likely nominee?
No, I think Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and the Democrats have a message focused on helping the middle class. We're not going to have we don't have the problems that the Republicans have. When Hillary wins the nomination, I believe everybody will endorse her and embrace her. We won't have the kind of summit meeting that they had to have at all. We are much closer on the issues, and we're much closer as a party than they are. They're all over the lot. You're not going to have major fat figures, elected contributors, leaders in the Democratic Party say, we're not going to endorse Hillary Clinton the way you're hearing so many saying they're not going to endorse Donald Trump. It's a world of difference.
Senator, some of the supporters of Donald Trump here on Capitol Hill seem to be giving the impression that they expect him to move away from some of the more controversial things he's proposed, such as the border wall and the deportations. Do you think that's possible, and what do you think the political ramifications would be if he did it?
Well, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. In a sense, they can go into the whirlpool or into a pillar of fire. To embrace all of Donald Trump's positions and show unity is a disaster for them. Trump's popularity is at 30%, 70% unpopular. To run away from it, their party's split and fractured. There's no good choice for them. And so they're trying to figure out how to deal with it, and it looks, it doesn't look very good for them. They're awkward. They're saying things that contradict one another. They're tying themselves in knots. And most of all, they're running away from it. Marcia, and then jump in, everybody.
Senator Schumer, you have firsthand experience with Donald Trump. You know him from New York. You know that he's been able to accomplish certain things in New York. I wonder if you think he has the chops to be president.
Look, if you look at the entire campaign, it's not just that I don't think he has the chops to be president. 70% of the American people think he doesn't have the chops to be president. He's very unpopular. Whether it's the positions he's taken, huge tax cuts for the wealthy, building a wall, not having any foreign policy projections, or it's the way he's talked about people. You can see that Donald Trump would not make a good president, and the American people see that as well.
But yet, there was a certain appeal to some people in this country in what some have called his pitchfork populism. And I wonder if you can see that appeal and to see the fact that people are fed up with things not getting done.
Look, he's had a campaign where he's won, and 70% of the American people don't like him. That's not a very successful campaign. You can appeal to a small group of people in this country, and only 10% of the American electorate voted in the Republican primaries. When the rest of the electorate rejects you, not just Democrats, but independents and women and many people of all different stripes, you're not doing very well. And that's why, by the way, that's why our Republican colleagues are running away from him. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They embrace him, they have trouble. They run away from him, they have trouble. They're in a huge pickle, and that's what's created this sort of circus here today. Debbie?
I was just going to, let me just add that it is the conundrum for them. On the one hand, on things like not raising the minimum wage, where Donald Trump has said shouldn't be one, or workers make too much money, or repealing the ACA, Republicans are all with him. The fundamental question, though, is he ready for prime time? Is he the guy that is prepared to be president of the United States? Running the Miss Universe pageant does not qualify as foreign policy experience. And when you look at the erratic nature of Donald Trump and the changing of positions and explosiveness and the language and how he will be viewed representing the United States of America around the world, what he's willing to do in terms of nuclear weapons, I mean, it goes on and on and on. The big question is whether or not he is prepared to be president of the United States when he is going to be up against somebody who, in my judgment, is overqualified, somebody who is absolutely the person that can walk in on day one with the knowledge and experience and can get things done.
Senator, if that's the case, why is he neck and neck with Hillary Clinton in your state? What is it that your constituents aren't getting?
Well, look, we have a state that's it's basically, if you look at the last 50 years, and I have closely, it's about a 52-48 kind of state in a presidential race, 53-47 maybe. So it's always going to be close. It's just structurally close. But I think it's remarkable when you look at the Republican caucus agenda here in the Senate for years now, especially on things as fundamental as the ACA and comprehensive immigration reform, as well as the tax cut issues, the big issues that involve the economy, the big issues that determine whether or not we're going to have a strategy for those folks whose wages have not grown in many years. I've quoted it very often. The Economic Policy Institute said that over 40 years, 9% wage growth. That's one assessment after the same wage growth number being tracked after World War II, growing at 91%. So when you have you go from wage growth of 91 to 9, and it lasts for 40 years, you're going to have a lot of people questioning who's best to focus on growing wages and incomes in the middle class. And I think when they do that, our side will do quite well, especially when you compare what we've been trying to do as a caucus here and what Republicans have been about for at least since 2009.
Let me make one other point, if I might. On the Foreign Relations Committee and on the Small Business Committee, I've heard a consistent theme that what our allies want around the world is predictability, and that what business wants out of Washington is predictability. Meeting after meeting, hearing after hearing, what I hear is that American leadership around the world requires us to have clear and predictable alliances and positions, and that what business wants out of government is set the rules and tell us what they are and be predictable. When Donald Trump said one of his absolute core values as a leader will be his unpredictability, and then he's demonstrated it by coming out with proposal after proposal, whether on foreign policy or on domestic policy, that are wildly inconsistent with each other and with the long-settled traditions of the United States, I'm convinced this is a man who has neither the experience nor the temperament to serve as a president of the United States.
Sure.
Michigan.
Yes.
Your colleague and friend Debbie Dingell has said to a lot of people, including me and others in this room, that if the Clinton campaign and the Democrats don't get serious about disaffected UAW and other union workers in Michigan and don't address them directly and change some of the approaches of the party, that she's vulnerable to lose to Donald Trump. That's exactly what she says, that he can beat her, that she goes to union halls where UAW guys are pro-Trump. And that this is the problem.
Well, let me first say that there's no doubt in my mind that she's going to be laser focused, as are we, in telling the full story of Donald Trump. When you put all of his policies together, he's talking about a race down, people losing their pension, people having less in wages. He thinks they make too much right now. It's a race down. And what we're talking about is continuing to push for a race up and move people up in terms of their incomes and their quality of life. So when the full story is told, when people learn about where he actually makes his products right now and the full story about how he does his business, I think people in Michigan are going to totally get it, and they're going to be voting for Secretary Clinton.
So the answer then to Debbie Dingell's concerns in Michigan is oppo and not addressing these other core economic problems that she says?
We absolutely, when you put Hillary Clinton's policies up against Donald Trump's sort of policies, whatever they are, day to day, there's no question in my mind that what she is focused on is good for Michigan. I've lived in Michigan my whole life. I understand what people are concerned about, and they are rightly anxious about what has been happening to their lives. And when we focus on the differences, the real differences, there's no question that folks are going to be looking at the fact that they want somebody that's going to fight for them and their family every single day, and that's Hillary Clinton.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Deb.